really important issues for the establishment, there is serious dissent. Right. Gingrich and his neo-conservative agenda in America has been pretty savagely lampooned. Mm-hmm. The apparently fixed succession for the Republican candidacy at the presidential election has come apart. Clinton, who is a powerful figure, is having great difficulty with Whitewater. Everywhere one looks, one sees disjunctures, openings.
Within a spectrum so narrow that you really have to look hard to find a big state Democrat. The position now is exactly what Clinton said. The era of big government is over. Big government has failed. The war on poverty has failed. We have to get rid of this entitlement business. That was Clinton's campaign message in 1992. That's the Democrats. What you have now is a difference between sort of moderate Republicans and extreme Republicans. Actually, it's well known that there's been a long-standing sort of split in the American business community. It's not precise, but it's sort of general, between high-tech, capital-intensive, internationally oriented business, which tends to be what's called liberal, and lower-tech, more nationally oriented, more labor-intensive industry, which is what's called conservative. Now, between those sectors, there have been differences. And in fact, if you take a look at American politics, it oscillates pretty much between those limits. There's good work on this, incidentally. The person who's done the most extensive work is Thomas Ferguson.
One more example, which will have some resonance in Britain and Europe, is the great argument over the North American Free Trade Association, the Nafta argument, where
That's an interesting one.
If there is something which one could describe as a global opposition movement, that is trade union, environmental, community-based, then it was certainly present in the anti-NAFTA.
Shall I tell you what happened?
Well,
shall I tell you what happened?
All I was going to say is that those arguments were well, we were well aware of those arguments.
That is flatly false. They were not permitted into the press, and I've documented this. I'll give you references if you like.
We read all about it in Britain, is all I would say.
I did not. For example, let me ask you, did you read the report of the Office of Technology Association of Congress?
Well,
did you read the report of the Labor Advisory Committee?
Well, I don't get these reports, but I read many articles about the anti-NAFTA argument.
I'll tell you what.
Some very vivid stuff.
Well, if you're interested in the facts, I'll tell you what they are, and I'll even give you sources. The NAFTA agreement was signed more or less in secret by the three presidents in mid-August at the time of the Congress, right in the middle of the presidential campaign in mid-August. Now, there's a law in the United States, 1974 Trade Act, which requires that any trade-related issue be submitted to the Labor Advisory Committee, which is union-based, for assessment and analysis. It was never submitted to them. A day before they were supposed to give their final report in mid-September, it was finally submitted to them. They were the unions are pretty right-wing, but they were infuriated. They had never been shown this. They had even at the time that they had to write the report, they were given 24 hours to write the report. They didn't have time to look at the text. Nevertheless, they wrote a very vigorous analysis of it with alternatives presented, saying, look, we're not against NAFTA, we're against this version of it. They gave a good analysis. Happened to be very similar to one that had been given by the Congressional Research Service, the Office of Technology Assessment. None of this ever entered the press. The only thing that entered the press was the kind of critique that they were willing to deal with. Mexico bashing, right-wing nationalists, and so on. That entered the press, but not the critical analysis of the labor movement.
Well, now, somehow, by process of osmosis or something, I picked up quite a lot of anti-NAFTA arguments on the basis of worker protection, environmental degradation.
May I continue? This goes on in the press right until the end. By the end, there were big popular movements opposing it. It was extremely hard to suppress all of this, to suppress everything coming out of the labor movement, out of the popular movements, and so on, but they did. At the very end, it had reached such a point that there was concern that they might not be able to ram this through. Now, take a look at the New York Times and the Washington Post, say the liberal media, and the national ones in the last couple of weeks. And I'll tell you, I've written about it and tell you what you find. What you find is 100% support for NAFTA, refusal to allow any of the popular arguments out, tremendous labor bashing.
Make sure that I understand the point about the liberal press as against the conservative press, because in Britain over the last 2 years, politicians I come across are deeply irritated, ranging on furious, about attacks on them in the press, day after day, on issues which have come to be known as sleaze. They feel that they are harassed, that they are misunderstood, and that the press has got above itself, is uppity, and is destructive. That's the message that they are giving to us. Now, are you saying that that
That's
whole
true.
process doesn't matter, as it were, because it's all part of the same...
I mean, when the press, the same thing is true here. When the press focuses on the sex lives of politicians, reach for your pocket and see who's pulling out your wallet. I mean, because those are not the issues that matter to people. I mean, they're very marginal interests. The issues that matter to people are somewhere else. So as soon as you hear, you know, the press and the presidential candidates and so on talking about values, as I say, put your hand on your wallet. You know that something else is happening.
But it's been much more than, certainly with us, it's been much more than bed hopping. It's also been about taking money.
Corruption,
it's been about the corporations paying for
corruption,
for
corrupt judges, fine topic.
Corrupt parties?
Corrupt parties. Big business is not in favor of corruption, you know. And if the press focuses on corruption, Fortune magazine will be quite happy. They don't care about that. They don't want the society to be corrupt. They want it to be run in their interest. That's a different thing. Corruption interferes with that. So, for example, when I just happened to come back from India, the Bank of India released an estimate. Economists there tell me it's low, that a third of the economy is black, meaning mostly rich businessmen not paying their taxes. Well, that makes the press, because in fact, certainly transnationals don't like it. They want the system to be run without corruption, robbery, bribes, and so on, just pouring money into their pockets. So yes, that's a fine topic for the press. On the other hand, the topics I've talked about are not fine topics because they're much too significant.
What would a press be like, do you think, without the propaganda model? What would we be reading in the papers that we don't read about now?
I've just given a dozen examples. On every example that, incidentally, you've picked, I haven't picked. I mean, I could pick my own, but I'm happy to let you pick them. On every one of those examples, I think you can demonstrate that there's been a severe distortion of what the facts of the matter are. This has nothing to do with left and right, as I've been stressing, and it has left the population pretty confused and marginalized. A free press would just tell you the truth. This has nothing to do with left and right.
And given the power of big business, the power of the press, what can people do about this?
They can do exactly what people do in the Haitian slums and hills, organize. In Haiti, which is the the poorest country in the hemisphere, they created a very vibrant, lively civil society in the slums, in the hills, in conditions that most of us can't even imagine. We can do the same much more easily.
You've got community activists in America.
Yes,
You've got I'm not talking about the so-called communitarian movement, but I'm talking about the local community activists and writers all over the place.
All over the place. Take, say, a city like Boston.
And the way
all sorts of people, they don't even know of each other's existence. There's a very large number of them. In fact, one of the things I do constantly is run around the country giving talks. One of my main purposes, and the purposes of the people who invite me, is to bring together people in that area who are working on the same things and don't know of each other's existence, because the resources are so scattered and the means of communication are so marginal that there isn't just much they can do about it. Now, there are plenty of things that are happening. So take, say, community-based radio, which is sort of outside the system.
I was going to ask you about that and about the Internet, which has certainly got pretty open access at the moment.
Well, the Internet is, like most technology, is a very double-edged sword. It has, like any technology, including printing, it has a liberatory potential, but it also has a repressive potential. And there's a battle going on about which way it's going to go, as there was for radio and television and so on.
About ownership and advertising.
Right, and about just what's going to be in it and who's going to have access to it. Remember, incidentally, that the Internet is an elite operation. Most of the population of the world has never even made a phone call, so that's certainly not on the Internet. Nevertheless, it does have democratizing potential. And there's a struggle going on right now as to whether that's going to be realized or whether it will turn into something like a home marketing service and a way of marginalizing people even further. That discussion went on in the 1920s over radio. And it's interesting how it turned out. It went on over television. It's now going on over the Internet. And that's a matter of popular struggle. Look, we don't live the way we did 200 years ago or even 30 years ago. There's been a lot of progress. It hasn't been gifts from above. it's been the result of people getting together and refusing to accept the dictates of authoritarian institutions. And there's no reason to think that that's over.
You've been portrayed, and some would say occasionally portrayed yourself as a kind of lonely dissident voice. You clearly don't feel lonely at all.
I say nothing like that. I certainly do not portray myself that way. I can't begin to accept a fraction of the invitations from around the country. I'm scheduled 2 years in advance. And at that, I'm only selecting a fraction of them.
And you're speaking to big
audiences. Huge audiences. And these are not elite intellectuals either. These are mostly popular audiences. I probably spend 20 or 30 hours a week just answering letters from people all over the country and the world. I wish I felt a little more lonely. I don't. Of course, I'm not on NPR. You know, I wouldn't be in the mainstream media, but I wouldn't expect that. Why should they offer space to somebody who's trying to undermine their power and to expose what they do? But that's not loneliness.
Professor Chomsky, thank you very much.